And we have a great ALKtALK, and so I want to welcome everybody. And I'm going to pass it off to Christina Hershey, and then she's going to come back to move some polling questions. So Christina, take it away.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Good evening. I'm Christina, for those who don't know me, and I'm part of the fundraising committee. And obviously this month, we're really focusing on Lung Cancer Awareness Month and all of our really great fundraising initiatives, as well as spreading awareness. So obviously the month is well underway.
When Robert accidentally swallowed the bee.
Oh,
You should have seen him. He's like,
Please, please mute.
sorry.
Sorry
Okay.
about that.
No worries. Okay, so Lung Cancer Awareness Month, well underway. Our social media team has really been busy plugging away at all of the various platforms. Hopefully you guys are following both ALK Positive organization and ALK Positive International, and are seeing all of the really great social media cards that are being shared, as well as the really great quotes that we have from various researchers and the top oncologists. So really getting some good traction there. Really, really great work that they're up to posting several times a day with really, really great information. So thank you to everyone who has submitted the request to get your own social media card and has begun sharing that within your own social circles or through email or however you want to share those. Really a great tool for spreading awareness this month. As well, thank you to everyone who has already started their fundraiser, whether through Facebook or through Kindful or whatever method that you wanted to do. So far for Lung Cancer Awareness Month, so far we've already raised over $53,000. And we also have the really, really amazing $130 donor match challenge that we wanted to acknowledge our match donors, the Huff Project. We have Links for Lungs, Emily Daniels, Links for Lungs Philadelphia, which is Brittany and Dan Wilson, Links for Lungs Foundation of Pennsylvania, JT Hedges, Kelly Culver with the Culver Foundation, and Jane and Kirk Smith. So huge thank you to all of these amazing donors for committing a $130,000 match. So keep up the great work, everyone. There is still plenty of time in the month to get your fundraiser started. If you're interested, we're posting within the ALK Positive support group once a week, but also you can jump over to the Facebook group for fundraising and research ideas. And there we're posting a lot more frequently as far as some tips and some spotlighting some of our really great top fundraisers, providing some inspiration, motivation, answering any kind of questions, really getting some good conversations there as far as fundraising ideas and any support you might need. So jump on over there, and thank you guys again. We're off to a great start and still not even halfway through the month. So really exciting. Thank you.
Thanks, Christina, for your time, and all the other fundraising committee members. It's unbelievable. I'm going to enter into a poll here. I'm going to launch a poll, that is, and launch a diagnosis, a length of diagnosis, sorry. And I'll be announcing the results because they don't show up on our recordings. So, all right, I'm going to end the poll and share the results. And we got 1 year or under is 21%, 1 to 2 years is 25%, 3 to 4 years is 28%. 5 to 6 years is 12%, 7 to 8 years is 7%, 8 to 9 years is 2%, 9 years or longer is 6%, which is great. And stop sharing that and go to our next poll, which is, have you registered for the ALK study? And this is the reason you're here, but the longitudinal study, that is. I'm very surprised by the results, by the way. All right, I'm gonna end the poll, share the results. 50-50, which is pretty amazing. So 62 people. So I'm gonna stop sharing that. And my last question is following. Watch this. Have you completed the survey forms? Okay, I'm gonna end this poll, share the results, and 27% of us have, and 73% of us have not. So I'm gonna stop sharing that, and I'm gonna turn it over to Colin Parton. As many of you know, Colin is involved with all of our medical committees and spent countless hours through the last 4 or 5 years, right, Colin? And Colin, unmute and let's start our ALKtALK.
Terrific. Thanks, Mark. So some very interesting results there on the poll. It was great. So a little bit of background for everyone. When I joined the ALK Positive support group back in 2017, there were only about 350 members of the support group at that time. That was March 2017. I knew nothing about lung cancer, just like just about everyone else that gets diagnosed with it. I did have a medical background, having been a dentist, but I certainly didn't know anything at all about lung cancer. So I started off trying to learn as much as I could, as quickly as I could, and reading as much material and getting to know as many of the doctors as I could and so on. And I kind of ran a little internal survey within the support group towards, I think it was the beginning of 2018, and we had a really good response rate. It was actually about after several months of cajoling everyone, we had about 50% of all the people that ever joined the support group at that time participated in that survey. That survey was not intended to be published. It was not intended to be shared with doctors or companies or anything like that. And so the results sort of just stayed very internal. It was very interesting for everyone within the group, but not external. And we realized there really was a need for researchers, both academic researchers and industry researchers, to get a lot of really in-depth data, and that we're ultimately the best source for that as far as patient-reported outcomes goes. So many people are not on standard doses of medications, and yet that would never show up in the trial situations, things like that. So we worked, put in literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours developing not just the questions, but then all the answers that have to go with those questions, making sure that the wording was very clear, which is not the easiest task. It's actually surprisingly difficult to formulate questions and answers that are extraordinarily clear to everyone that doesn't have a medical background and doesn't necessarily have English as their first language even. We were ready to launch in 2021, and then we had a bit of a hiccup with the platform that we were going to run on. But we have now got it finalized on the Red Cat platform, and Dr. Morharf Alashkar, who is a ALK positive cancer patient, but also an MD and an academic researcher at the University of Washington, is the principal investigator or PI for this project. At this stage, I think we have close to 500 have already registered, and somewhere around about 250 have completed the 2 forms that you've been presented with so far, or 3 forms that you've been completed with so far. Dr. Ken Culver is now the chair of all the medical committees, and he's also the director of research and clinical affairs at ALK Positive. Ken has an extraordinarily deep background in both research and as a clinician, and he will be speaking today to the importance of data and the importance of everyone that possibly can filling in the survey forms. I do want to make it clear that these forms are also able to be filled out by caregivers who tragically, sadly, have lost their partner. In fact, that sort of data is actually probably even more valuable than the data from those of us that are still alive. So if you know anyone who's a caregiver that lost their partner, please let them know that they can, and really would be strongly encouraged to participate in the survey. So Dr. Culver will be talking about the value, Dr. Kemich will be, and if Dr. Lovely joins us, she'll also be talking to the value of that, as will Dr. ALKtALK. So Morhaf, would you like to start talking about the forms and the survey and what can be accomplished and what some of the questions cover, and then we'll have Ken come on and speak from his aspect.
Yeah, I would love to. Thank you, Colin, very much, and Mark, and for everyone who worked on organizing this event. My name is Morhaf ALKtALK. I'm an ALK positive survivor. This is actually 6 years in November of this November will be 6 years since my diagnosis. And family doctor by training, as I said, and a researcher, associate professor here at the University of Washington. I have PhD in research methodology. Was really humbled and very grateful for all the work that's been done for the survey. And when Colin and I have been chatting about this, when Colin approached me to join the team, I was excited to participate, and then later received funding from the ALK Positive to conduct this work. So this is a very, very important project for me, not just as a survivor, cancer survivor, but also as a researcher. This is patient-led research. We're asking the questions that are relevant to us as patients. We're presenting them, we're formulating them, and of course, with the help of the team that have sophisticated skills, we're building them so we can get the answers that are useful, not just for us, but also objectively for researchers as well. Colin, Emily, Ellie, Jenny, and others have spent countless hours to get this project up and going. We had 3 goals in mind when we started working on this project. We wanted to understand first previous experiences of people with the diagnosis, with the treatment, with the surviving of ALK positive lung cancer. What is actually taking place? We want to follow people over time and hopefully get ideas or hints about variations between people and about factors that contribute to the fact that some people are doing better than others among the cancer survivors. So trying to find those factors that play a part and point to them. So then later on, more robust research methods come to study them as well. So we can figure out and potentially optimize the cancer experience. We want to also build this as a foundation, as a platform that bring people together as a registry. So for researchers in the future to say, hey, I have this research question and I need patients with these qualities, people who failed this drugs. Can we find 50 or 100 or whatever number that we need and to help us recruit them? So this platform, the survey registry, will become a place for doing that exact task. We will be able to answer many questions, and we'll publish this in peer-reviewed journals. We will ask first about the characteristics of the patient population that constitute us, who's getting the diagnosis, who's getting it, and then looking at who's getting it early, who's getting it delayed, what is actually taking place during the diagnosis process. And as I said, what are some of the factors that predict better outcome in the experiences of some people? We care for cancer not just as a surviving, as living long. We want that, of course, but we want to contribute to this experience for people to thrive again. We, as people reminded of mortality, we want to live a rich life. We want to have good quality of life. We want to find what's meaningful for us. So how can we optimize the quality of life for people so they can thrive as they're living with cancer? This is considered longitudinal study, observational study. So we're looking at people at the time of the completing the survey. We're looking back in time to where initially they got the diagnosis. We're asking questions about what took place back then, and then asking them them about, bring me up to speed with all the treatment that you had and the experiences you had between then and now. And then how are you doing now? What's your quality of life? Then we come back again in 6 months and say, hey, what happened in this time span between last time you were surveyed and this time? Any progression? Hopefully not. Any changes in medications, and if so, why? And how are you doing at this time? And we repeat this every 6 months to see how people are doing over time, and then be able to be in a better position to understand factors, again, contributing to people doing better or doing worse. The data will, of course, be available for people, be available for all kind of purposes. This is, again, you're telling about the community, you're learning about the community. So for future fundraising, you'll use some of this data. For calling attention to people who are receiving better care than others. This is in the area of healthcare disparity. Very, very important subject for me personally, but for many people as well. I identify as a person of color. I'm an immigrant, and we know that there are some groups, some populations in this country, and of course internationally, even the disparity is more stark. So we want to call attention to who's doing better because of access to better resources, and who's not getting the same opportunity. We want to live in a world where there is more justice, more fairness. So that's important as well as we tell our stories. We want to bring attention as well to the findings that we have. So hopefully invite more research to explore certain areas that potentially, let's say, for example, there are a certain number of patients happen to receive certain kind of treatment in a certain sequence, and we're finding that they're doing better. So maybe we can invite researchers like Dr. Kamij and others to say, hey, can we study this in a more robust way, maybe some randomized trials, or of course, after piloting, after following the more robust methodological approaches. I want to leave 5 minutes of questions in the end. My plan was to take about 15 minutes of your time and now I'm about 6 minutes. So I will take about 4 minutes to demonstrate some of what you will see when you sign up for this. First, I want to put the link, and actually I'm really excited that we have 50% of the people registered, 50 not. So hopefully by the end of the day, we get 100% registered, and hopefully, and I'll show you why, very, very important to complete the registration once you started. I'll start with that actually, and I can show you how there is a great momentum. This chart is from last week, and shows where we were around 400. Now it's closer to 500. We started here with 0, but then every week we're getting closer to, at the beginning, a boost of 200, 300, 225 registered. People who complete sometimes lag behind, but we're hoping that everybody then will complete over time. And you have that flexibility. Once you start the survey, you can complete it later at any time. Hopefully not later by far, because if we hit that closer to 6 months mark, you're going to get the follow-up survey. So that becomes obsolete to answer some of the questions like, how are you doing? Well, how am I doing now or back 6 months ago? So we want you to start, complete it, pace yourself. It's a bit lengthy. So just make sure that you start and you complete. I want to show you how the process goes, and I'm going to put the link in the chat box. If you're on the Facebook group, there is a post by Colin that shows really why this, and you can search on it, using Facebook skills. You can go to the ALK Positive group, search for the survey, and you're going to find this post by Colin, and you're going to see the link for the survey, and we're going to post it for you here as well. So if you see, please click on the link here, because that will take you to the link that I included in the chat box. That will take you to the registration page. Registration page will just allow us to capture the first name, capture the email of the person, and we want your email address here so we can send you the follow-up reminders. So when you start, also you can get links, and you can stop and continue at a later time, because once you register, there will be created a file for you, for which you can complete the survey at a later time, as I explained. So please include email. Please type your email. We've had this mistake sometimes. I'm very lazy, so I would type, and then I'll type like and then copy and paste it in a confirming email. Please don't do that, because we want to see your actual email. I want to make sure that you're not making mistakes, because any letter mistake, that means the email is going to go into a black hole and we won't be able to get it. Provide an email address for a caregiver provider, because we want to send you reminders, But then once if we're not hearing from you, we're going to send that nudge to your caregiver. Hopefully we get this. And we're coming with the heart of service to doing this. In a sense, we're asking you to help us with this, make it your contribution to lung cancer awareness. But also we want this because it helps other people. So that's why we're nagging. We're allowing ourselves to nag and remind you frequently, and even take some of your effort and time, because we believe it is useful for the whole community. Once you register, you're going to get this one successfully registered. Check your email. It will come from this email address. Keep this page open. Don't close it, because you may need to send an email to this ALK Positive lung cancer at Gmail, so they can help you troubleshoot any problems throughout. Once you go to your email, you're going to find this form, and I actually just did this today. So I confess I am among the ones who need to complete it. I just registered now. I wanted to model this for you, but I need to complete it, and I will tell about Colin. He also needs to complete it as well. We realized last week that we've been putting all this work on this, but we ourselves need to work. We've piloted it, so we completed it once, but now we need to do it for this work. So please don't feel bad that you haven't yet, but we urge you to participate. You get a link. Once you click that link, it takes you to two forms. The first one is demographics of the person. I won't be able to demonstrate it for you because I hit complete and it's sent, but I will demonstrate for you what's included in the diagnosis, treatment, and surviving. And I'm already running out of time. In any of those forms, there are questions. For example, in the diagnosis, we're asking you, what are some symptoms and signs that happen with you? And you check boxes along the way. Scroll down, what's your weight, etc. You check box, you give information. So it's a survey just like any survey that you had. What factors, what exposures, for example, to certain things, you check and you assess, you answer the question just like you do any survey. And as Colin said, we attempted to choose the language that's as easy and clear as possible. Let's see where I am. I'm here. So for example, this is also another form. I click the form to take me to the experience of treatment. And you can see they ask about procedures in the diagnosis, like bronchoscopy, etc. And asks you if you say yes. It's a little bit slow, maybe because I'm opening many windows. Once I clicked yes, it dropped down this list of procedure. You can drop down and you choose one, bronchoscopy, for example, and then it will fill in the date and the time, etc. Asks later about treatment that you have and about the condition. I don't want to bore you with this. I want to leave some for the excitement of finding the questions for the first time. But we are here, that email address, and I will post it again in the chat box if you have any questions, is there for you to reach out. And I already sent the link for that for the survey, so you can complete it. Colin, I know I saw you put a comment, but I want to let me see, get to some. Let me open it for questions first here, as I'm trying to catch up on the chat box to see what other questions I have. Feel free, if you have questions, to unmute and ask, and it'll take about 5 minutes or more as Colin and the team think is appropriate. But feel free to ask any questions.
I'll just add here, don't be nervous about joining the registry. We've already had, as I said, close to 500 have joined, and 250 or thereabouts have already completed the 3 forms that they've been presented with. And we've had remarkably few people with any questions or concerns about how to complete it. So clearly it's functioning and working quite smoothly. For people that have had a more extensive history and people that have been around, like Mark Rosenzweig, for many years and have had a lot of different procedures, it does take time to fill out. If you're in your first year or two of this journey, it takes much less time. So it's all the more reason, if you're new to all of this, it's all the more reason to join in and do this, because it's easier to get started on this when you don't have a long story to tell than when you've got a long story to tell, like Mohaf and myself and Mark and some of the others do. So.
And we hope that everybody will get to that place where they have the longest story to tell. I'm going to answer a couple of questions in the chat box. Tonya, yes, so once you register, you're going to get to your email that link that I shared, and you're going to get an email with a link. That link will be yours, will work all the time. Anytime you click it, it will take you to the survey where you ended or where you stopped. Once you can always say save and submit later, and I would encourage you to do that if you think you want to go back to it. Once you submit the form, it's actually submitted. So you might want to think about it as 4 different surveys. Anything that's submitted is submitted. Anything that's saved is there, and then there is this little square corner at the corner that you can move between different forms among the surveys. Hope that answers your questions. And there's another one. Donna, you mentioned the difference between at diagnosis and now. This is actually really, really important. Very, very important for us to know what had happened, because we're doing this we call it retrospective work. Retrospective, at a point of time, you're looking back into history. But we also want to learn about the present. We want to know how you're doing now. So the best way for us to do it was to say, hey, well, in the past, what happened? And we define the past is at the time of the diagnosis. But there's also, and that's another past, like pasteur, is where you're before your time of diagnosis. You know, you're like, you can imagine before you received the diagnosis, when you were healthy before, or when you were healthy defined as no cancer diagnosis. There are some questions related to that part. We did our best to make those as clear as possible. But if you have questions, feel free to email that contact to clarify. Other radiation and primary tumor health.
Moha, before you answer any more questions, let's have Ken Culver and Dr. Kamich talk about the importance of getting as much data as possible, especially when it comes to analysis of subgroups. And I think that might answer some of the questions that I'm seeing in the chat. So Ken, if you're there, would you like to speak to that as well?
I'm here, Colin. Thank you. It's been 2 months. As of yesterday, I've had the privilege of working at ALK Positive, and I've seen that ALK Positive is a dynamic and amazing organization, and I'm honored to be a part of it. And I've seen sort of the background of what's going on with this survey, and Morhoff and Colin and others who've been bringing it to reality, and I'm very appreciative and inspired by that. I'd like to talk about the implications of this for the commercial aspects related to ALK positive lung cancer. So one of the key initiatives going on at ALK Positive is to engage biotechnology and pharma companies to think of ALK positive lung cancer as a place they should be developing their drugs. To convince a company, a biotech or a pharma, you have to have data. You have to be able to tell them how many patients have this kind of ALK lung cancer, perhaps by line of therapy or mutation status. You have to be able to give them an impression of how healthy they are, how long they're living, what their status is. Without that basic information, it becomes a challenge because we're competing with all other cancers in asking pharma and biotech to pick ALK positive lung cancer as an area of focus. So I would like to say that it's really important that in this environment, as we think about how do we get companies to commercialize new drugs for ALK positive lung cancer, and to think of new other modalities, whether it's immunotherapy or different kinds of TKIs or some novel new oncolytic virus or whatever it might be. This data is a foundational aspect, and without that, it makes our ability to compete for those companies' attention more complicated and difficult. So thanks to all of the 500 and hopefully another 5,000 who are going to be signing up for this survey, because that's the kind of data that's going to allow us to make sure that ALK positive lung cancer is getting the attention it deserves from biotech and pharmaceutical companies.
Terrific, thanks. And would you like to speak just also to the importance of large numbers when it comes to getting data that can indicate trends in subgroups?
Yes, and I would imagine that'll be something Ross will want to talk about as well. But ALK positive lung cancer isn't one disease, right? As people evolve, their cancer evolves. Of course, the different TKIs, the tumors change. And so when we talk to companies who are developing specific therapies, those different subgroups become or may become highly relevant. And so that is one of the most important things we're getting from the ALK registry data, is to understand what is the treatment course that most people are following, and how patients, if they get lorlatinib first or they get lorlatinib last, what is the influence of that, and how does the course of their disease change? And so these are vital, and us, again, making our case to biotech and pharma companies that ALK positive lung cancer should be a priority in their drug development program.
Terrific. So Ross, you're on.
All right. Well, first of all, I want to say how wonderful it is to hear Ken Culber's voice again. He has a very distinctive and very reassuring tone to his voice. And I haven't seen him in person for, I don't know how long, 3 or 4 years, probably.
Yeah,
So
COVID.
good to have you on board.
Thank you, Ross.
So I was pretty excited about this. At some point, I looked at some of the questions, but it was so long ago, I actually can't remember what all the details are. I would echo what Ken said in terms of, this is showing that this is a powerful organization. But I would say it was more than just with pharma. I mean, if you're a politician, showing that 500, 1,000, 1,500 people can get together and fill out a survey and prove that they're all part of, one community is actually incredibly powerful. This isn't just one person kind of nipping at somebody's ears. This is an army that, is being presented, in your face. In terms of the research aspects, there obviously are some devils in the details. We don't want garbage in, garbage out. I can tell you that some of the most satisfying research I've been involved with is exactly this, where there's a pattern that no one else has seen, that's been staring you in the face, that A is associated with B. And at some point, a clinician goes, well, I wonder if A is associated with B. And then you need a data set to confirm your idea. And so that, I'll give you an example. So early on, 10 years ago, we started to make the observation that the pattern of spread of the cancer around your body was different in ALK than it was in some other types of lung cancer. So we needed a big enough data set to find that. A few years ago, we showed that the risk of having a blood clot within 30 days of your diagnosis, and that's usually what sort of brings you to medical attention, was dramatically different for ROS1 than it was for ALK, than it was for EGFR and KRAS. And when you start to do this, the next phase is prove the observation is there, and then the basic scientists have to get involved to say, why? Why is there this connection? And the end of the day, the goal isn't to just go, you're going to do well and you're going to do badly. The idea is to try and figure out why you do well and why you do badly, and then change it so more people do well. But you have to start with proving that your observation isn't just, I tossed the coin and I got 2 heads in a row. So the size of the data set becomes very important. That allows me to ask my first big question, because it's an area I'm interested in. Do you capture whether somebody gets a blood clot at the time of diagnosis?
I'll have to look back at the question specifically. I believe we have asked about presenting symptoms, and I believe this was one of the options that are available. And Colin is shaking his head. So yes.
I can't speak definitively, but 99.9% sure the answer to that is yes, Ross.
Oh, good. That's the right answer.
It's an incredibly detailed, very in-depth, and there really will be an amazing wealth of data to come out of this. And the biggest part of it's going to be, figuring out how to get all the analysis done and having the questions posed to, and that's where researchers are going to be really helpful to say, these are the questions we've got, and how do we answer it from the data that we've got there.
Yep.
And coming back to the subsets, just as an example, if you've got a particular submutation, and so say we've got 1,000 people have completed the surveys, but only 10% have a particular mutation. Well, now you've got 100. Well, 100 you can draw fairly good conclusions from. But if you only had 100 doing the survey and it was 10%, then you'd only have 10. Well, from 10, you can't draw any conclusions at all. That's just like flipping a coin and saying, well, we happen to get 8 heads in a row, but that doesn't really tell you that that's going to be the case. So yeah, please, everyone, just do it. And it's the one thing we can all do to contribute to research without having to fork over any money. I'll say it as simply as that. It's the thing that we can all do. We don't have to make a donation. You just have to donate your time and your story, your experience, and you'll be helping research enormously. Dr. Lovely, are you on yet? Dr. Lovely will get here when she can. She just got off a flight. Does anyone have any questions? Let me have a look in the chat, see if there's any more questions.
Colin, I have a mechanical question. When I that yellow banner that appears like you're for the red cap, you're entering a site or something with phishing. Do you know what I'm talking about?
No, I don't. I think if anyone's got any specific concerns, it might be just best to email the address that Dr. ALKtALK gave earlier on.
When Dr. ALKtALK demoed that, the yellow banner came across also. And I was hesitant to go to the next step because
okay, I know what your question is.
It said red cap's not a legit site or
yeah, it's absolutely 100% legit.
Yeah, no, I see it actually. Yeah, be careful with this message. Yeah, I mean, I got it, and I'm the PI, so yes. Unfortunately, it's coming. We chose a Gmail account to provide the communication for the ALK positive, and that's and yes, that's just to make for accessibility and for future communication, for ease of future communication. But yeah, that's going to be there.
Someone asked a question. There's 3 forms. They think they've only filled out 1 survey. How do they check to see if they've completed all the surveys? The simple answer to that is you will get sent reminders. If you've got any outstanding surveys still to be completed, you will receive emails reminding you that you've still got surveys to be completed. So please don't ignore the emails that come from the email address for this survey, because there will be more surveys coming your way in the future, either extensions of the surveys that you've already completed, but there's also going to be new forms coming out as well. There's one on biopsies, there's one on physical activity that you've had 3-year journey, one on diet 3-year journey, and one on your quality of living and quality of life of experience during your journey. So please continue to keep your eyes open and opening any new forms that get sent to you. There's another question. Doesn't seem like it. Yeah, that's really about it for questions that we've got. Someone asked, what if you submit a form and realize afterwards that you made a mistake on dates? Or I could extend that and say made a mistake on anything else. You can again email that address and ask to redo the form. But honestly, if it's just 1 or 2 small things, I wouldn't worry about it too much. But you certainly, if you feel like you left off half the form or something like that, just email that address and they'll send you a new form to start over again. Dr. Camage, did you have anything else that you wanted to add about this, or did you have anything else in general that you wanted to just chat about in general?
Well, I mean, I can chat about anything you like for as long
Yeah,
as but
I know you can.
So no, on this one, I'm just excited to see it get off the ground. And I think testimony to ALK Positive being one of the patient advocacy groups that's really got its act together and sort of very publicly done that. So I think, you know, if you can get all your members to fill this out, again, you're just planting a flag saying we need to be taken seriously. You know, we're a movement.
And a big part of what we're hoping to achieve with this, Ross, is to get people that are patients of doctors that are not a member of the ALK Positive support group to participate in this registry and survey as well. And so that'll be a movement where we're going to be really encouraging doctors to spread the word amongst themselves to get this get their patients to complete this registry, because we know that the number of people that are members of the ALK Positive support group as a percentage of the number of ALK Positive patients is still a very, very, very tiny percentage.
Yeah, I've got another question I'm going to ask Morhat here. So again, you know, if I sit here long enough, I'll think of a question every minute, but here's my latest one. So one of the things that I often see when I'm doing second opinions is people who are diagnosed, they find they have deposits in the brain, they don't have the molecular back, and they're whisked off for radiation, even if they have absolutely no symptoms. And so it would be really interesting to see how often that had happened, and then use that as a kind of like, this is the size of the issue that we need to address.
That data will be there.
Should be there, yes. And that I'll use this segue to answer actually a question presented earlier about what kind of information happened to me, what kind of information to gather, information about time, information about sequences of treatment, when this treatment happened, when the biopsy took place, because that's exactly how we'll be able to answer a question like, I was provided radiation or chemotherapy before I received my molecular testing, for example, and that can be problematic, and we need to shed some light on it. I want to emphasize something Colin said, which is reaching out to providers so they can get so can spread the words to their patients. This is very important, and we're going to do it using our own networks. But we want to rely on your own network. So we will communicate with you in the newsletter or other platform. We will include the material that you can take onto your own oncologist and say, hey, this is a brochure. Can you pass this to your patients? We want to make it as easy as possible, and we're thinking about that. Ken was suggesting, how can we get it into the EHR so it would be just more like a dot phrase potentially for the provider to include it in the discharge paperwork for the person, where they can get, here's a QR code or here's a link that you can go to and complete the survey, because that's when we get the breadth of participation and the continuation of this. So please help us, and we'll communicate about this by not just completing it, but also reaching out to the oncologist so we can access other patients. One other question that came, and I'll answer it quickly. Yes, you can, the person from Jakarta, from Indonesia, please, we want to see how people are doing across the globe, and that will draw some comparison as well. So your participation is very helpful.
Yeah.
Speaking of being across the globe, I'll let you know at this stage, the last report that we've already got patients from 39 different countries have participated so far. We expect that'll continue to grow.
One question by Cherise as well. Yes, Cherise, we're asking some questions about practices the person are doing, and things that they're doing for their own self-care. We're covering some elements that you're including in here, and we're opening the for in the future waves of surveys. We may consider other elements as well, as we think are relevant to the patient group. And we have a community advisory group that meets quarterly to discuss next steps and to keep us at the pulse of the community and what they want.
There's a question here, is this survey just for ALK? The answer is yes. This is very much specific to ALK. And I'll narrow it down even further. Although this organization is for all types of ALK cancer, this particular registry and survey is only for lung cancer. So that nonetheless is probably 98% or 99% of positive patient population, but it's not 100%, but it is only for lung cancer patients.
I have a question for Dr. Camage or Moroff or Colin. The information that you're gathering, this determine anything with sequencing of TKIs?
So will it determine anything with sequencing of TKI? Like which one?
Just in general, will the information be gathered where a person like myself has been on 4 TKIs?
Yeah.
Is that information be derived and given somehow or another fed into the computer to determine the sequencing?
I mean, if everybody had done something completely different, then it's just going to look like a bag of sprinkles, so we won't be able to deduce anything. But if there's enough people who consistently did A followed by B or B followed by A, then we'll be able to make some kind of conclusions.
Right, and of
And
course,
also with chemotherapy.
Yeah, whether starting with chemotherapy makes a difference, that should also be able to be deduced from this. One of the things, we've kind of touched on it, but even though we have fantastic representation, we always have to recognize that we may or may not be representative. And so, for example, let's say we wanted to show that things were different in different countries or in different states of the USA. You have to do it as a percentage of the people you have from each of those countries, not just we had 3 people from Canada and 700 people from the USA, and therefore there was a different percentage. You've got to do it within each of those groups. So again, it's about numbers. The more people who contribute, the more we will be representative. So the person from Indonesia is fantastic. Let's get some more people from Indonesia.
Thanks.
There is a question.
A couple of other questions in the chat here. Should both the caregiver and the patient complete the survey? Ideally, if the patient's able to be the one to do it, we prefer the patient to do it. Obviously, there are some situations where the patient's not in a condition where they can completely do it themselves. But certainly, there's only one survey per patient. We don't care whether it's done by the patient or by the caregiver, but just one survey per patient. There's another question. What information should I gather to prepare for completing the survey initially? That's a great question. Basically, if you can collect all your medical records since you were first diagnosed and have those on hand, especially any biopsy results, any events where you had surgery or chemo or anything like that, radiation, the more information you can have on hand, the easier it will be to complete the survey.
There is a question about what is there a brochure and information about the study, and yes, but I discovered there is a folder in here, and I'll include the link. But as I clicked the link, I realized that actually the brochure is not in this folder. So as I'm going to put the link here, I'm going to put the link in the chat box. You can click in it, and you expect that a brochure will land in this folder later on today. But there will be also communication in the newsletter. Is that correct, Colin? Coming up soon. That will
both the newsletter and the various support groups that I've been posting to. We've got a link to that folder that's got the brochures in it that you can print out and give to your oncologist or nurse practitioner or whoever. And we'll get those to you as well, Ross. There's a question here. Are there questions on the survey related to person's wellness, such as mental health, stress levels, spirituality, family relationships, whole care, self-care? And there will be some questions on that in some of the forms that get sent out later on. So but they're not in the initial round of forms, but they will be in some of the forms that come later. Question about have we established a firm deadline for completing the surveys? This is an ongoing process that will be going on over the years. But with that said, there's going to be many papers published from this, and the sooner we've got a significant amount of data in, the sooner the papers can start getting analysis can start getting done, and papers can start getting published. So yeah, just go ahead and get the forms done as soon as you can would be great.
Colin, how long does the initial survey take, like an estimated time?
As I said, that varies extraordinarily on the complexity of the individual's cancer history and the length of their cancer history. So I can't really give an answer to that, but just in general terms, someone that's fairly recently diagnosed should be able to get it all done in, an hour to 2 hours. And someone that, like Mark, that's got a very complex history, when they start having to get onto the biopsy forms and things like that, it could be done in 4 or 5 hours. But again, it doesn't have to all be done in one sitting. You can do half an hour here and just save it and come back to do another half hour later on. There's nothing wrong with doing that whatsoever.
Thank you.
Hey, Colin, this is Ken again. I just wanted to mention that one of the key decisions that was made was to go deep and to get as much information as possible on patients, as opposed to get a little bit across all, because the value of getting more information across the lifetime history of patients is way more valuable. So while it takes more time, the value of what they're contributing is much greater.
Thank you for that, Ken. All right. Since we brought Dr. Camage in as a special guest, and Dr. Lovely may be able to still join us, she's still getting home from the airport. But if no one's got any more questions about the registry and survey, we could open it up for a few minutes for people to just ask Dr. Camage any generic question. So it can't be a question specific to you as a patient, but if it's something that you think will be of interest to a number of people on the call here, then please feel free to ask.
I just want to say to Dr. Camage that he has to come back for another segment where we get an hour to talk to him versus 5 minutes. So, but it's good seeing you, and thank you for joining us.
You're welcome. So what else am I going to do on a Sunday night, right? I could have a life, but I've tried it. It doesn't work for me. Right. Do you want me to just pick out some of the questions here? And then let's see. The ones that aren't to do with the survey. So when do the symptoms of ALK start? So before you get diagnosed. So I guess the question is kind of really bigger. The question is, if you had a magic time machine and you went back from the day you were diagnosed, when would you first be able to see ALK? And the answer is going to be different for everybody. So there's something called the doubling time. So how long does it take for a pea to turn into the size of a grape, to turn into the size of a golf ball, to, whatever fruit analogy you want. And that is different for different people. One of the things, though, is because cancers tend to double, there always is this impression where you go, well, I started the year and I felt fabulous. And then suddenly, it all went downhill in the last two weeks before I was diagnosed. And that's because, if you go from, softball size to melon size, to give an extreme example, I mean, that's a big change, absolutely, when you get to the doubling at something. And I think that's why suddenly we appear to get symptoms, whereas we live in blissful ignorance beforehand. And it's not because the cancer's done anything different. That's just how it'll present. The only example we have is unfortunately based on smoking, which obviously is completely irrelevant here, but they do that to try and figure out how long a cancer's incubation period is. And what they do is they take smokers and they say the day you stop smoking, And if you look in thousands of people, when does your risk of lung cancer drop to the same level as somebody who's never smoked? And that takes about 12 years on average. And so they therefore go, you know, a cancer could start as many as 10 or 12 years before you're actually diagnosed. We don't know if that's the same for ALK.
There's a great question here that just moved. Can you talk about dose reduction safety for quality of life? So, in other words, I'll rephrase that. There's obviously a balance between reducing the dosage to get rid of some of the adverse effect symptoms, but then on the other hand, you may be reducing the time of effectiveness of the medication. So if you'd like to speak to that, that'd be a topic of great interest.
Yeah, I'd say it's a major stressor for people. I saw a lady the other day, not with ALK, but with a different one, who had a whole bunch of side effects from her medication. It was like, well, why don't you reduce the dose? And it's like, well, what if the cancer progresses? And so there is that, you know, that damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. I think in general, if you reduce the dose, your chance of anything caring about it in your body is very small. Usually the doses that we use are so far above the level that we need in the body that, you know, you could be on half the dose or quarter the dose, and your time on the drug would probably be the same. That is not true when you talk about the brain, because only a proportion of many of these drugs get into the brain. And therefore, if you drop the dose, it's possible you may drop below a magic level that's actually efficacious. So if you don't have deposits in the brain, that's probably an easier conversation for you. If you do, you've got to weigh up, well, you know, my doctor is doing close surveillance of my brain versus how miserable your life is or isn't on the dose that you're currently on. And remember, at least from my point of view, the philosophy is perfect control of cancer, perfect quality of life. But you get to determine what that balance means for you.
Yeah, that last sentence to me is very key. Even if you knew exactly how long you had before progression, if you were taking 1,200 milligrams of alectinib versus 900, and no one will ever know that, but even if you knew, and if you knew exactly what adverse effects and exactly how much adverse effects you're going to have at 1,200 milligrams versus at 900 milligrams, even if you had all that information, the decision as to whether to stay on 1,200 or to reduce to 900 would be totally different for different patients, because some people would value the extra time more than the reduction in adverse effects, and someone else would value the reduction in adverse effects over extra time. So even when you've got the facts, which we certainly don't, but even when you've got the facts, it's still very much an individual decision.
I have a question, Dr. Kimmage, maybe that's on the mind of many people. The sequences of TKI, you know, when one starts and then fails, then you move to the next one, then that fails, you move to the third. And I know there are a few pathways. Can you share some about the potential sequences? Depends on what's currently considered standard of care, starting with the first line. Let's say, for example, I got diagnosed today. You're going to offer me option 1, option 2, or option 3, if there are. And then if I go with option 1, what would be, if that fails, what will come next? And then the same thing for 2 and 3, with some hints to time that's expected to survive on each drug.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's really only 2 choices at present. So you either start on what's called a second generation drug. And for everyone on the call, you're already on something. So this is kind of like, well, you can't change what's already happened, but for the purposes of discussion. So you either start on alectinib or brigatinib, and then I'm going to come to where do you go to next, because it's not a simple answer, or you start on lorlatinib. That is the current choice. But I'm going to push back and say the answer, it's not like if you start on this, then you have to do that next. That I think is actually the wrong strategy. When you're on a treatment and then it stops working, people's cancers become resistant in different ways. And so what I do is I rebiopsy and I reanalyze, and I try and make that where do you go to next a personalized decision, as opposed to pretending I'm treating a population of people. So if somebody said, well, this drug's got a 45% response rate in the second line. And you go, well, that's fine, but that's like 50-50. So, unless you can, it's not like everybody gets 45% shrinkage. It's literally saying 45% of people will benefit and 55% of people arguably won't. And that's because you've got heterogeneity there. So there's no drug company pushing this. Anyone with a drug license in the second line wants everybody to go on and says, isn't it wonderful that we have a 35 to 45% response rate? But for me as a clinician trying to look after, a patient, it's like, what this is telling me is not everybody responds, and that's because they haven't all progressed in the same way. So I would personalize that decision. I mean, sure, if you're stuck on a desert island, then you're going to take the 45%, and then you could technically rebiopsy if it doesn't work. I guess that's the most conservative thing you could do. I try and get the data to lead the decision rather than explaining why the decision didn't work.
Thank you. And that actually takes me to your next line of thought, takes me to my question. And I appreciate the thoughtful first answer with personalizing the care. The next question is, we know we live in different parts of the country and different parts of the world where the resources are not the same. We don't always have a Dr. Kamij as our primary oncologist. Many are managed by general oncologists who may not have the resources. Accessing that second opinion or accessing the resources, what are some of the recommendations that you have that you could suggest for people to make sure that they're receiving the standard of care, or they're receiving potentially good care? I know this is a sensitive subject because you're an oncologist. You may want to say, hey, my colleague did not do the right thing, but there are people who are not doing the right thing. So that's true of them. And here we're not talking about which tomato you put on your pizza. This is about your life or death on the line. And unfortunately, I've seen it in the community where people do not receive the right treatment because of access to resources, or because of care, or because of, again, sometimes prejudices, or racism, etc., all of these disparity factors.
Yeah, we should draw a distinction. I mean, you're absolutely right, but we should draw a distinction between where you have a very well-informed, very compassionate doctor who just doesn't have access to those resources versus a poorly educated, I don't care doctor who has all the resources but can't be bothered to do them. And unfortunately, both of those scenarios exist. I think not everybody needs a second opinion. I think, first-line decision-making is actually pretty easy by now. It's really when you get to a sort of second-line treatment decision that you might need a second opinion. You can, I mean, there's a wonderful page on the ALK Positive thing listing, people that you guys have listed as potential ALK experts. And it's a pretty good list. It's a pretty generous list. And so that's a good place to start if you feel a need to get a second opinion. Some people like to do it even when things are well, so that then when the other shoe drops, they're kind of already on that person's radar. And then for people around the world, so amongst the 158 of us here, I'm going to tell you some secrets, okay? So the remote second opinion program, which I run, is almost certainly illegal. So you can shut me down and send me to jail if you'd like to report me. I'd prefer if you didn't. Okay, so the law about practicing medicine across state borders, across international borders, has really not been written up since the 1700s. It sort of goes back to the idea I'm on a wagon and I somehow travel from Colorado into Utah and I start selling snake oil. It sort of hasn't taken up speed. With COVID, that all got dismantled. And for a brief period of time, it showed you exactly what could be Shangri-La, where you could just have a telehealth appointment with anyone, anywhere. And then stupidly, they just reassembled all the stupid rules. So I do remote second opinions in Norway, Egypt, Australia, wherever. And the way we make it not illegal, okay, so I'm assuming you're not going to throw me under the bus here, is stupidly enough, the concept of illegal is the transfer of money. It's a very American concept. So if I just talk to you and I don't charge you, then no one knows that that's illegal. It might be written by that, but it doesn't go on anyone's radar. And the only time it will ever go on the radar is if you try and bill it through insurance. So the remote second opinion just flies under the radar simply by being billed on a credit card. That's the beginning and all of the magic around it. And I think, other centers did contact us and find to do it, and that skirted by the seat of your pants kind of legally was too much for some of them. Not surprisingly for the big centers, who, you know, no one's going to come after the University of Colorado because we're a little podunk place, you know. But if I was MD Anderson, you know, they could, that's a huge issue if they get, you know, someone would wanted to sue them, because that's who you go after. You go after the big players. That was probably more of an answer than you wanted.
No, I think that's actually a great answer. And we're speaking of you mentioned 160 people because this is an advocacy area, right? This is where you're telling your legislator that the law is stupid, because there are people in rural areas who need that second opinion. And I'm not going to fly to Colorado to get that. I can just get them on Zoom. So maybe create an exception for this group and similar groups of patients who are vulnerable, who need that care, and among others. So I think that's actually right to the point. Thank you. But yeah.
So it's funny, I had a conversation with Longevity, which is another of the patient advocacy groups, I don't know, a couple of years back when we sort of started to do this. And their initial reaction of saying, well, we should just make these things easy, was they were just like, that is never going to fly on Capitol Hill. You know, there's too many vested interests, there's too many states. I mean, you know, who is being harmed? The only people being harmed are the state medical boards, who don't get my registration fee for being licensed in Hawaii. And those are the only people who would actually ever sue us. But, you know, that's too much of a political hot potato. But the longevity approach was define a different category of physician, a kind of level of expertise which is not present in every state or in every country, and somehow make that an acceptable alternative to give a kind of pan license to, or somehow immunity from prosecution. And that may well be the path forward. I actually feel so strongly about this. There's a teeny bit of me in my, on the days when my wife doesn't say that's a terrible idea, to sort of stand up and go, someone should sue me, and then I'll go down in flames, waving the flag. But I think that might be a little selfish to do that.
I know that Ken is taking notes because we've been having some internal conversations about what we can do to get the second opinion program to function more widely. And yeah, it's all about these nonsensical regulations, as you say.
When you do it, again, there's that element of trying to decide where, when you lift the lid and you say, come look at this, everyone should do it. Some people's first reaction is, well, you shouldn't be doing it, let me close it down.
Right.
Yeah, and as a New Jersey licensed physician, I can prescribe drugs anywhere in the US. There's not a drugstore that won't take my New Jersey license, even in Colorado. Yeah, no, it's just there's these inconsistencies which are just not acceptable.
Yeah. But Moore have had a great point, which just on that first thing about access to care, so not education. And I personally have found it extremely educational for me, just to be able to, because the remote second opinion is I don't care for the patient. I literally, there's a local physician who is caring for them, and then and the last line of all of my letters say, please show this to your treating physician for their thoughts. So we just kind of, you try and join the team as a kind of cheerleader. But you know, again, there's no point saying to the person in a place that has limited resource, well, what you need is this incredibly expensive thing that's only available in one place in the USA. And that's educational for me, because medicine is in many ways the art of the possible, and it's different in different places.
How are you doing for time, Dr. Kamich?
Well, I was fine until my wife phoned me saying, where are you? But I just shut her up, so that's okay.
Because
I'm sure I'll get help to pay for it later.
Right. Well, we don't want you to get in trouble with your wife. There is a question here not related to you, Dr. Kamich, but from Amanda Neustadt. Will we as patients have access to the survey to share? There's definitely a lot of value for everyone doing the survey and to have data. Curious who will own the data, ALK Positive Inc. So do you want to address that one more, Huff?
The ownership of the data. So yeah, so because this is a research run at the University of Washington, so the Research Institute has access to the data. There is an agreement with the ALK Positive that they also have it. And this is done in service for the ALK Positive community. So it is the ALK Positive community data. The people identifiers are held private, so they're not going to be provided to anyone, and we will share the identified data at no cost to all entities that are in service for the ALK Positive, including pharmaceutical, actually, as long as they can show or tell us that they're going to be use this data for the service of the community.
All right, there's a note here from someone that says they completed the survey while they were on the Zoom call here in just 25 minutes.
That's good.
Someone else,
That's really good.
and someone else said that they were diagnosed 5 years ago with quite a complicated history, and they were able to get it done in an hour and a half. So I don't think it's. I think everyone here is willing to put in whatever amount of time it takes to help researchers come up with the right questions to ask and find the right answers. Dr. Kamich, there's a question here, a great question from Ken Schlosser. Any updates on, and you can, rather than giving an update, you can fill in everyone here briefly on the radon study that you were doing.
No, the challenge is, so this is, I'll just fill you in. So one of the questions is what causes ALK? And one hypothesis is it may not be smoking, it may not be air pollution, but maybe it's related to radon gas. And the theory behind that is because it's literally a break in your chromosome and then other things join together. And the sort of thing that breaks a chromosome is a little bowling ball of a kind of nuclear particle, and that's what radiation is. And so we thought the best way to prove that was to use the only resource that exists in the world, which is an archive of lung cancers going back to the 1970s from uranium miners, which happens to be in Colorado. And so we have essentially bought that archive, and it will be coming down to us fairly soon. The challenge is when you've got a sample which is 50 years old, you know, you've all seen Jurassic Park. It's kind of that level of how do you pull out the DNA from this thing, which is all a little fragmented. Our initial attempts were, you know, you pull it out and it just looks like chicken noodle soup. I mean, it doesn't look like anything sensible, but we're still working on it. So no useful updates, I'm sorry to say.
All right, I'll ask two more questions, and then I think we should wrap it up there and let Dr. Kamich get his evening back and let everyone else get their evening back. In early stage cases, do you believe that ALK cancer can be treated curatively? Are you aware of any cases that have been treated curatively?
You mean from early stage? Yeah.
Successfully, treated successfully curatively.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, there must come a situation before the cancer has spread, and if some people are lucky enough to be diagnosed then surgery or radiation could cure them. The issue is, as everyone on this call knows, you know, you're not the person they're looking for to do CT scan, because usually you're a never smoker, you have fairly good lungs before all of this started, and there's often some delay in your diagnosis where someone was working you up for allergies or asthma or something else. So there's no reason, if it's found early, that it shouldn't be curable. And I think one of the things that will come in the future will be something to identify who should get CT scans to try and find an early stage. And the assumption is it's going to be some kind of blood-based marker looking for a little glimmer of ALK in the blood that wouldn't normally be there. And then the machine will go ping, 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 and then you'll get sent for a CT scan.
Great. And we've got another 35 questions here for you, Ross, but we're not going but we'll finish with the last question. Someone asked, what blood tests do you normally run on your patients that have ALK?
Well, so you mean like routinely? So they get,
yes.
Well, so to do medical speak, they get a CBC, complete blood count, CMP, which is, you know, liver, kidneys, and a few other things in there, kind of calcium and magnesium. And then many of you may know, I also check these serum tumor markers. I want to clarify for the millionth time that I do not use serum tumor markers to change treatment decision. I use them to tell me when the CT scan is missing something. And then if the markers are going up and the CT says everything looks fine, I do a PET scan, and that's where you find the deposit in bone or the deposit in a lymph node that no one knew was there, and then you zap it with radiotherapy.
What are the blood markers that you test?
I do 4, and the reason we do 4 is we did a study a few years ago that not everybody's cancer expresses any marker, and not everybody's cancer expresses all of the markers. But if you do 4, something like 95% of cases will identify at least one of the markers being positive, and they are CEA, CA125, CA199, and CA2729, and they all go in the same tube, but it's a separate tube from the CBC and the CMP. And some of these things go up and down, so it's not, you don't panic just because there's a blip.
Yeah, I've just as a final note before we wrap it all up here, I've been following, we call them the Cambridge tumor markers. I've been following the Cambridge tumor markers for the last 5 years. And exactly as Ross said, they do go up and down, and you don't want to get your knickers in a twist, so to speak, over little fluctuations up and down. But certainly, and this applies to all the other blood values as well, certainly not just the tumor markers, you'll definitely see fluctuations up and down. You'll even see little fluctuations up and down in the sizes of the tumors showing on the scans. So it's really my experience, and I'm certainly not an oncologist, not telling people what to do, but you know, follow the bigger trends rather than just looking at. It's kind of like the stock market. You don't want to look at the variations up and down every day. You want to look at the long-term trends. I kind of look at it very much like that.
I have a different analogy. Mine is kind of like if you're sitting at the beach, you know, little waves go up and down, you don't panic. But if there's a tsunami heading towards you, you got to act on it.
Good point. Good point. Terrific. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us on very, 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 very short notice, Dr. Kemich. Unfortunately, Dr. Lovely wasn't able to change flights or get home in time, but we'll get her joining us another time. And I'll hand it back to Mark to wrap everything up.
I'll head it to Summer with the final announcement.
Yes, thank you all for coming tonight. It was so wonderful. And thank you for all of our participants. Colin, Moorhoff, Ken, and Dr. Kamich, thank you all so much. Thank you again for participating, everybody, and putting your questions in the chat. So great to see so many of you in the little squares. We for sure have an ALKtALK on December 11th. There may be another one. We'll keep you posted, so check your inboxes. But Nuvalent will be back December 11th. The Nuvalent team, just to give us an update, discuss new sites opening, and possibly review ROS1 trial and where we are now in phase 1 and then in the future phase 2. So mark your calendars, December 11th. Thank you so much, everyone. Enjoy your evening.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
Thank you.